I'll be back.
Okay, so I got us started up anyway. So while Florin is off fiddling around, I'm going to give you guys the run through. So I'm familiar with two manufacturers of tube fly stuff. One is HMH, which are the manufacturers of that very pricey vise out of the States. And they make this this device that holds your tubes. It consists of a little cast metal piece with a holder that clamps the tube, and that fits in your standard vise like so. And then you're supplied with the kit. You're supplied with two mandrels that hold tubes, and they're two different diameters, and that's to suit the two different diameters of tubing that they supply with the kits. So you just slide the mandrel into the little vise thing, and you slide it back far enough that the end of the tubing hits the edge of the mandrel. And then when you cinch it down, that keeps the tubing from rotating. And the kits have typically they come with a selection of tubing that there's two sizes and types of tubing. There's the relatively hard plastic tubing there, and then there's a softer, large diameter tubing there. And the reason for the two different diameters is that the hard plastic tubing that is at the front when you put this in the vise, this hard plastic tubing is what you tie the fly on. And then the soft plastic tubing fits over the butt end of that, and you usually cut a piece of it about 1/2 inch long. And that's what the eye of the hook slides into to hold the hook in place behind the tube fly. That's the HMH product, and it comes with in different packages with different lengths of the two pieces of tubing. The other one, which, and the problem with that is that's mail order. In Victoria, the tubing material that we can get here is sold at Robinson's downtown. And that's, and this is the mandrel for that. And it's fairly straightforward. It's got a very skinny portion at the front. And then that front widens out, and it's kind of flat, but it widens out. And you put this in your vise, and you have to kind of piss around with it to get it to sit properly. And you adjust the clamp on the vise so that it will grab that thing pretty securely, so it doesn't bob up and down or wander around. Just takes a minute to adjust the vise. There we go. Get that going horizontal to start with. So you tend to be tying out on the far end of this guy. It tends to bob around a little bit, but it's not bad. It's fairly solid. And it has two different kinds of tubing. One is like the HMH. It's got a skinny tubing that you then attach a piece of fatter tubing on the back of. I'll show you that in a minute. But the main one is this guy here, and it comes in a couple of different lengths. And it's a one-piece hard plastic tubing that has a narrow diameter at the front and a thick diameter at the back. And when you slide this onto the mandrel, you slide it down until it hits the part of the mandrel that's thicker, and you get it on there really good and solid. And then it will not rotate. Well, sometimes it will if you over pull on the thread. The other one is a little different because the other type of tubing is a little different. They're shorter. You can get them in certainly at Robinson's. You can get them in two different lengths, and they're not just a straight hard piece of tubing. They're a hard piece, hard piece of the narrow tubing, but it's got this little molded plastic thing on the end that if this end of the tubing has a little bit of a notch on it, and the idea is that when you get your and that's the narrow tubing, the hard tubing is the one that you tie your fly on. And then you get this other, if I can get it out of here, you get this other tubing that's soft. And it's not a straight piece. Again, this is why these things are not cheap, because it must be a little tricky to manufacture. They have a narrow end and a wide end, and they're different diameters on the inside. And what happens is you take the little nipple here at the end of the hard tubing, and you take the narrow end of that soft tubing and you push it over top of that. And this is where the hook sets when you've got your fly all tied. So you tie the fly on this bit, and then this piece at the back is where you shove your hook when you're setting these things up. So I'll show you that. These guys here, each one of these little packages is about 11 bucks. So it's not inexpensive to get set up with the material, the parts. Then they come with some accessories, or you can get accessories for them. They have a range of beads these ones are tapered one way. There's a standard round bead, and I think there's a couple other different styles. And that adds some weight to the front of the fly. And it finishes off the fly kind of nice. And you can get these in different colors. Then there's this little plastic disc thing they call a sonic disc. This is useful, and I'll show you how that works in a few minutes. Hooks, what I've been using are, this is the Olympic Peninsula something hook, OPST hook, Skagit hook. And they're what they call an offset bend short shank barbless. And the reason I like these guys, and this is a size 3. The reason I like these guys is they have, oh, that's going to be a problem. Drop the hook on the floor, and we'll look for that in a minute. They have a ring eye, which makes it easy for that to go in the end of the tube when there's a leader attached to it. And by offset, that means that the bend of the hook is offset, so the point is slightly to the side. And it's almost like a circle hook. It bends up. So the beauty of those is that they don't foul hook as much. Well, I'm gonna have to get the magnet out to find that hook that I dropped on the floor. Here. Remind me not to forget the hook. My wife will be after me. Okay, so what do we use for materials? Now that the hook part is sorted out. For thread, I start with white 6/0, 8/0, and just because it's not colored. Now, if you want to have fancy colored body, you can do that if you want. Now, the length, the first fly I'm going to tie. Oh, by the way, one of the reasons to tie these 2 flies is you can store a whole whack of them in a little plastic bag because they don't have hooks sticking out, other than a few that I've got here. They don't get all tangled up. So the first one I'm going to tie is this guy here. And it's basically a bunny leech. And as you can see, this is where the hook goes. So if you were going to do an extended body fly out here on the coast where you're not allowed to have 2 hooks on the same lure, you'd have to tie the body on a shank of a hook and then cut the other one off and then run some monofilament down to the second hook so you can tie everything on the second hook, which is a little complicated and it wastes the cost of a hook. This way, it's one hook. And one of the reasons for fishing with tube flies is that for certain toothy critters, you want to get the hook out of the way when you're trying to release a fish. And so what happens is when the fish strikes, it separates from the fly and the tube slides up out of the way so that when you want to remove the hook, you just got to play with the hook itself. Or if you have to cut it off, you're not losing the entire fly. And it's not hard to get the hook in there. So that's the reason, that's what the tube fly, that's number one. And that's a standard bunny bug. The other ones that we tie are Spay Flies, which I'll show you a couple here. So here's a Spay Fly, which is basically all Marabou, mostly Marabou. And here's another one, Marabou. Now the beauty of these things is that if you construct the body correctly, the Marabou doesn't go down like that and stay matted down. It tends to breathe, which makes for a very lively looking fly. So if you're going to fish for steelhead, those would be the version that you'd want to use. I'm going to start with the first one, which is a standard bunny bug. And I'm going to start about a 1/4 inch in front of where the diameter change with my white thread. And I'm going to make that good and solid all the way back to there. And just standard like you're tying on a regular hook. And from there, I'm going to go back to, I'm going to want an extended underbody on this. So I'm going to come back 1/2 inch maybe. And at that point, I'm going to use for the underbody is some sparkle braid. And it's just, you can use any one of these braided materials. You could probably do it with tinsel, but I just want something that's shiny. And this sparkle braid is nice because when I tie it down back here, then I'm going to move it up to where I'm going to start the bunny bug proper. When I wrap this stuff, it's supposed to be round, but it will go flat when I pull it up against the tubing. I can wrap it so that it lays flat. It doesn't produce a lot of bulk. And it's got a little bit of sparkle to it. It's kind of shiny. And I'm just gonna, when I get to the transition here, I'm just gonna make sure it's good and snug. Here, and I'm gonna go on the smaller material. Now for this fly, I'm not gonna make it particularly long, this particular one. So I'm gonna stop it about there. And all that's going to extend past the body part of the fly is this part here. That's what the fish are going to see underneath the rabbit strip. And so that's on pretty solid. And the reason to use white thread is I'm bringing the thread back now over top of the sparkle braid, right back to where I started. Now I'm going to use rabbit strip. Now there's two different ones that I've used so far. This is the micro rabbit strips. They're very, very skinny cut leather. That's a standard olive one. Nothing says you have to just stick with olive if you want to do bunny bugs. So the stuff I like is this barred rabbit strip. It has this coloration on it. And I'm going to extend that. I'm going to eventually, when I finish, I'm going to cut this off here, the tubing off, so that it doesn't stick way out the back. I want my hook about there. But I want the rabbit strip to extend almost back as far as the tubing goes there. I'll measure that over top the tubing from where my thread is hanging. I'm going to separate the fur front to back so that I expose the leather part of the strip. Sit it on top, and I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, pull the strip up and wrap in front a couple of times. Bring my thread up about halfway up the sparkly body and do the same thing, separating out the rabbit strip from the, and I put my thread down in that V, sit this right on top of the sparkle body. And again, right up to the front of the sparkle braid now. I'm going to do the same thing. This is, I think, what anybody who's ever tied one of these style of flies, this is what they call Matuka style, tying these strips down or materials down, so that you end up with the rabbit strip sitting on top with a little bit extended out between, and the thread holds that rabbit strip right down onto the tubing nice and securely. And I'll do one more. I'll come up a little bit more. Spread it out. Get on that leather strip. Can pull it a little bit away from me and then wrap in front. Bring my thread up about halfway to the front of this tubing. Now we wrap around the tubing, the leather part of the rabbit strip, stroking the fur back, just like you would with a normal bunny bug on a hook, a long shank hook. And keep going till I get to where the thread is hanging. And at that point, I do the same thing. I spread the fur out so that all I'm going to tie down here now is the leather part of the rabbit strip. And I need to do it in such a way that I'm actually going back a little bit at a 45-degree angle over the leather so that it doesn't stick up too much. And 2 or 3 wraps in front, and we trim it off. Take the thread and snug down that rabbit strips leather. So now I have what would be like a traditional bunny bug. It's got a fuzzy part at the front and a nice long skinny tail at the back. And I like this barring. It really gives it some character back there. Now, if you wanted to get fancy, one of the things you could do is you could take a grizzly hackle and tie one on each side that goes back along the side to give it some more barring. But I'm going to do it fairly simple in the interest of time here. I need a head on this thing. I'm going to take this gel spun fritz, which is gaudy stuff. I'm going to build a head out of this. So I expose the core and tie that down. So it's good and solid. Bring my thread up so that it's about a little less than 1/4 of an inch from the very end of the tubing. You'll see why in a minute. And wrap the gel spun fritz around the tubing to make a bit of a bulky head. Like so. Finish it off there. And wrap in front to tie it down. Trim. So that's the basic bunny bug. I'm going to get my fingernails in here and make sure I slide that back from the very tip of the tubing. To finish it off, I'm going to get one of these beads. And this just is a hot spot type bead. For me, it's just a contrast. Before I put the bead on, I'm going to just build this little bit of thread up here, right where the gel fritz ends. And I'm going to whip finish, and I whip finish it. Got to be careful to keep the standing part of the thread from wrapping around the mandrels. It's a little tricky to do the whip finish by hand. Now that the whip finish is on there, I can cut my thread off. And I get my Sally Hansen's hard as nails. And just right where the thread is, I'm going to glue it down a bit and leave that wet for the moment. Take my bead, and it's got a big open, it's a tapered thing. It's got a big hole at the back and a skinny hole at the front. Put the big hole onto the mandrel and slide it back, and it's designed so that the hole at the front just barely fits over the plastic tube. And I seat it good and hard back there. Now the glue will help hold that bead on, but to make sure it's not going to pop off the front, I have my friend here. This is a barbecue lighter I was given many years ago. It's a little torch, and I gotta get it to fire up here. It takes a second or two. There we go. And all I do is I bring the torch near enough to melt that tubing just a little bit before I take the mandrel off. When you do that, it melts the tubing enough that it won't slide off the front of the mandrel. Slide the whole thing off. Come in the back here and trim off the tubing behind where the bunny bug ends. And I'm going to cut it enough that I can, about 1/4 inch, so that I can see where that hook is going to go in when I put it in the back. I'll put it back on the mandrel so you can see what the finished product looks like. So there you go. That's the first of the 2 flies. So of course you can play with proportions and everything if you want. Make it a little bigger, a little shorter, a little longer, whatever suits your fancy. So that's the basic tube fly that is designed to be like a streamer. I think one of the reasons I tied this was well, when we did this with the Hay Brown guys, it was something for the guys in Edmonton who like fishing for pike and would like to have a extended body fly where you can get at the hook without losing your fingers to the pike's teeth. And it would provide lots of disturbance and action for a pike to want to chomp on. That's why I did that one. Stuff out of the way. You could make it even more gaudy if you want and use the orange gel spun. I'm going to use that in a minute too. So that's fly number 1. Again, I can put that in with all the rest of mine with no hooks attached. There's a whole collection of those kind of flies in a little plastic bag. You don't need a fly box. Okay, the next one's the Spay Fly version. And the Spay Fly version uses this second one. And like I say, these come in this one. I think there's an even shorter one and there's a longer one that have this little piece of plastic ring. And then, like I say, this little point has got a little raised area here that holds the soft tubing on. Just get that out of the way for the purposes of tying. I slide this onto the mandrel, and again, I want to seat it pretty good back there so it doesn't turn. Got to keep your fingers out of the way of the point when you do that, or you'll stab yourself. White thread again. So before I put the white thread on and get started, the first thing I'm going to do is this. These Spay Flies, one of the things you want to do is you want to make sure that when you wrap Marabou around the tube, and here's one here. When you map the Marabou around the tube, you want to make sure that the Marabou doesn't collapse up tight against the tube, or it won't maintain that breathability. So what I'm going to do with this is I get one of these guys here. It is this a little plastic disc. I'm only going to use one right at the back. I don't want to use it all the way up the body, but one at the back. And that slides over the mandrel center hole down the tubing, and it hits that plastic ring thing there. Let's get rid of that. Okay, there we go. This is where I'm going to start my thread in front of that, about a 1/4 inch in front. Wrap back over top of that. Make it good and secure so that the mandrel isn't, I made it good and secure so the mandrel isn't going to spin. First couple of times I did this, and the mandrel spun and get halfway through the fly and it would go and unwind on me. I'm going to build up a little dam of thread in front of this disc. Now what this disc is going to do now is when I wrap Marabou around this tubing, it's not going to collapse towards the back. That thingy is going to keep it out of the way. Now, where did I put my stuff? Okay. I've got different Marabou here. All right. The gaudy one.
Yes, in principle, you could use a bead if you're tying on a regular hook.
Yeah, you could use a bead that would fit over the mandrel, and that would work as well. So I'm going to use these really nice woolly bugger Marabou, and I've got them in 14 different colors. So this one I'm going to tie with some gaudy colors. There's yellow and orange and chartreuse. There we go. Or you can use them in the more traditional Spay colors, which is purple and pink and blue. And because I use these ones, they have a really nice long Marabou fibers and a fairly thin quill at the end, which is going to come in handy when I start wrapping this on. Stuff those back in the packet. Good morning, Brian.
morning, Dave. I'm sorry, I came on just before 10 thinking I'd catch but you got an early start.
Yeah, well, we got here this Marabou, and I stroked the Marabou back from the tip to expose the stem. And I faced the curve, because it has a bit of a curve. It curves away from me. I'm going to face the curve away from me and little 45-degree angle and try and tie it down right where I've exposed the stem. A couple of wraps. And I take the tip end, I'm not going to trim it off. I'm just going to pull it up and wrap down in front of it. Bring my thread forward a little less than 1/4 of an inch. I need hackle pliers for this. Grab the tip. And as I wrap this Marabou, I'm going to keep the curve of the Marabou facing the back. I'm going to stroke it back and wrap it around. Again, stroke that material back. And I keep going as many wraps as I can get before I get in the really thick stem of the Marabou. And if I keep them fairly close together, I get a very bulky Marabou body. Now let's get into the thick part of the stem. So I'll pull that Marabou forward a bit. And so I just get the stem when I try and wrap down. I wrap in front again. Trim it. And of course now, I wrap that stem down good and solid. It's fairly thick at that point. Now to keep the next batch of Marabou from collapsing, some more of this gel spun Fritz, gel core Fritz. This one's a chartreuse color. And you can get this stuff in all the colors of the rainbow. Expose the tip, the thread, tie it down. And wrap that around the plastic mat, the plastic tubing. And I'm just going to make enough of a bump. 2 or 3 wraps is plenty. So that bump is going to prevent the next wrap of Marabou in this thing from collapsing against the tubing. Use my fingernails and I'm going to shove that back as far as I can and wrap in front of it so the next wrap of Marabou goes there. Try and get some, I'll get some yellow here. The yellow tends to be a little longer for some reason. This batch of yellow is a little longer than the chartreuse one. And I like that because you can see from the back here, you can see that the quill is not, I get about 2 inches of that stuff before the quill gets so long that it's, or thick that it's hard to tie down and wrap. Again, expose the quill at the tip, tie it on right at the front of where that Fritz is. Pull the tip back so I can wrap over it. Come forward a little bit. I'm going to use 3 different colors again. Where did I put my, there we go. I'll need my hackle pliers again to keep the stem out of the way while I wrap this down. Stroke it back. And again, when I do this, I have to make sure that I get all of the Marabou out underneath so it's not trapped. And sometimes blowing on it And stretching with your fingers helps that happen. Right. Now I get to there. This is always the tricky part. I want to pull out these longer strands out of the way to expose the stem if I can. And tie down the stem. It gets a little messy at this point when these marabou are really long. That's okay. That's the whole idea, is to have that supple the marabou there.
Found unconscious and unresponsive last week, earlier this week, and he is improving. Things are doing better. There's still a ways to go. So if you will, see some positive signs and some really good improvements, but keep praying for full restoration for Barry.
That was Win, it looks like. So there's my first two wraps of marabou. And to make it really gaudy, I'm going to do one more. And to separate it from the other two wraps, I'll use the gel fritz again. Expose the little string at the center. Come up. I want to leave some room at the front here. So I've left a little room. I'm going to do a couple of wraps, couple of 3 wraps, so enough so I get a little bit of a ball there. You could do this with dubbing, I suppose, if you want to get a much skinnier fly. But the whole idea is to have this material, be it dubbing or fritz or chenille, is just to keep the marabou, again, from collapsing up against the tubing. I'm going to just seat that right at the back there. And the last piece of marabou for this one is going to be orange. This ones are a little harder to get a good one because it's orange for some reason. Is a little more stubby stem. That'll do. Again, hold it by the tip and pull back to expose the stem. Hold it down with the curve facing away. A couple of wraps, pull the tip up. Get your thread forward. And I only want to go, I want to leave a good 1/4 inch at the front here. Collect my hackle pliers. And around we go. Again, blowing on the marabou keeps it from getting matted down on itself. And that's probably good. Tricky part is trying to get just the stem and not trap all the marabou here. Trim that marabou out. Build up a little bit to tie that stem down and provide a base for the last thing that's going to go on, which is this other bead that I've got here, just to give you some idea of what the variations in available beads are. They come in different weights and different colors and stuff. So now I'll get my whip finisher for this and make it a little easier. trying not to wrap that mandrel up with the other stuff. It's a little tricky to do. There we go. And then the same thing with the glue. Stroke all that back out of the way. And a little glue on the thread right at the front. And slide the bead here that has a nice little cone shape to it over top of the plastic and seat it back there really good. Get my friendly little fish barbecue lighter. And again, just melt that plastic a little bit. Let it cool off. So that's the basic body of the fly. And I'll slide the fly off the mandrel. Now back in here is where that little pointy bit has that I attached the second little piece of flexible tubing. And I get the narrow end of it and I put it over top of the end of that. And then the hook, you run your mono through the front of the hook, out the back, tie your hook on, and then slide it up and shove the eye of the hook into that tubing. And then tie your non-slip loop or whatever it is on the front of this perfection loop so you can loop it to your tippet. And that is him. That's your Spay style Marabou fly. And I would think that would be a fairly attractive pattern for, I think Pike would like that too. What do you think, Lauren?
They certainly would like the thing that probably the Marabou is maybe a little bit on the fragile side, but maybe with a tube is, if you want to use Marabou for pike, it's probably with a tube.
Yeah.
The best way to use it, because it doesn't get as much of an opportunity to be chewed on.
Yeah.
It's usually not when you hook the fish or bring the fish to the boat. It's when you're landing the fish and you're trying to remove the hook.
Yeah, and if that hook is come out of the tubing, and the fly will slide up the tubing out of the way. We did that with barracuda flies, and let me tell you, you want to keep your fingers well away from the teeth on a barracuda.
So how well did you do Marabou flies for barracuda? Yep. And did the Marabou withstand the treatment well?
Yeah. Well, it gets slimed, but yeah.
Okay, well then, if it works with barracuda, I would see no reason why it wouldn't work for pike.
Yeah. So there you go. Something new for a little different technique and a little different approach to tying flies.
Thank you, Dave.
That's very nice. And when we don't find materials at Robinson's, we just give Robinson's a call, and the other Robinson's is going to have 14 colors of it.
Oh yeah, they get all sorts of, and they carry this this really nice Marabou as well. They also carry the skinny rabbit strip, these micro rabbit strips that I really like for tying rabbit strip flies, because it sits down and it wraps around the hook really nice.
Yeah, no, I thought I'd just give you a call if I don't find it at the other Robinsons.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Will do.
There you go. So it's now Florence' turn.
It's Christmas time. So it's kind of you know, there are no trees to be had, and at least we have snow, so it does look a little bit more Christmassy out here. But I was thinking, okay, what can we do? You know, that's not an Alexandra or a Christmas tree. So this one comes out of Jack Shaw's book on tying flies for trophy trout, and it's an interior pattern, and it goes back to the 1930s and 40s. To it's a Bill Nations pattern. It's a fancy fly, so-called. It's an attractor. And it's kind of, you know, the standard stuff, right? Some teal flank, which always looks nice, some tinsel, some silver. So there are, you know, undertones of a Peter Ross here, for example, and some of the other classic wet flies. So this one here, I'm tying on a size 8, 3906B, which is a slightly longer shank wet fly, but it's pretty heavy. It's a pretty heavy wire hook. And otherwise it's black thread. In this case, I think I'm using a Danville 3/0. Which is a little bit sturdier, so I can use for my second pattern as well without having to switch bobbins. And for the tail, I just get a little bunch of fibers from a heel flank feather. So this is, you want to select these for, you know, nice distinct markings. And if the fibers don't sit very well, one trick I find to work for me is just trim the end where you pulled it off the stem. And it's kind of, the fibers kind of tend to stick together a little bit too much. And then just roll it between your fingers. And that gives you a little bit more of a uniform look to the tail. Okay, so then measure the tail. I do about shank length, maybe just a little bit shorter. And attach it at the back with a few turns. And then I'm going to do the tinsel. Now, if you want your tinsel body to look nice, usually you need two things. One is a smooth body. You notice I have just a wee tiny little bit of a bump there, so I'm going to have to watch it. And the second one is double wrap the tinsel. So start at the front. So attach the tinsel here, the front. So this part here, the front, is going to be covered by the dubbing. Get the thread out of the way. And then I tied it gold side up, so when I start wrapping, it's going to come out silver side up. Okay, so I just wrap straight off the bobbin. And I first wrap backwards towards the tail. And here the difficulty is to make sure that I avoid the point of the hook. And I don't, sometimes if you give your mylar a nick and then you put enough tension on it, it's just gonna break off. And you don't want that. Okay. Once you're happy that you've gone far enough to the front, bring the thread back and secure the mylar. Whoops. Trim. And now it's time for a little bit of dubbing. Just tidy up here so that it looks nice. And the dubbing has to go, you know, a fair bit to the back. So about here, I'm going to start the dubbing. And for dubbing, I use just seal fur in red. You want a nice, you know, primary color type red. this one to give it this nice, bright, cheerful look. Of course, seal fur, I guess it's a bit of a tough material to work with in any climate. In Alberta in the winter, it's particularly exciting. I guess the drier your conditions are, the drier your fingers and the dubbing and everything else. You know, I guess I could say on the plus side, it doesn't get moldy. Okay, so I have, as you can see, quite a messy, but that's part of the allure of the seal fur. So if I find some of these fibers are sticking out a little bit too much, I can just go and just trim a little bit here and there. Just be careful. Don't. This is the time when threads get cut. I'm not going to demonstrate the cutting of the thread. We all know how that's done. Okay. The next ingredient in the recipe calls for hooded merganser flank. I have all sorts of materials, but hooded merganser flank feathers I don't have. It's a bit of a chocolate brown, you know, all the birds I've seen are kind of this color, somewhere between this color and something a little bit more of a reddish brown. Okay, so one of these is going to work. And what the recipe is calling for is a folded flank feather from the merganser. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try my best to fold this. This is pretty unruly material. Usually folding doesn't quite work. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut this off the stem. Actually, no, I'm going to try to rip it off after I line the tips and then see what I can or cannot do with it. So I begin with a bunch that I held between my fingers like this. And then I try to fold it as best as I can. And if that fails, then I'm just going to roll the fibers between my fingers and see if the folding works. This is not exactly the most maneuverable of materials. This is kind of what I ended up with. There are always a few stray fibers out there. So I can try to do a bit of stroking and stuff, but if the feather you started with is not the most symmetric of feathers, this moment is a little bit tricky. So just hold it. So transfer to the other hand right over you where you stopped the seal fur dubbing and attach it right in front. Okay. And trim the waist and add 2 little accents of red. And this is going to be a little bit of what this is dyed goose shoulder. So some of these old recipes call for ibis, or when ibis was no longer available, they switched to dyed swan feathers. Now I haven't been able to find anybody supplying swan feathers, so the substitute feather to use for these sorts of things is apparently goose shoulder. And goose shoulder is also very nice because the fibers, as you will see, have a nice tendency to stick together. So if you grab here, I separated from the feather about 3 fibers, or maybe 4. And what's important is to separate an equal number from both sides. So you search for feathers if you can, if you don't have to mail order them, which is usually the case, unfortunately. So if you can find them at your local fly shop, then just look through the packets and really search for things that are as symmetric as possible. So if your feather tip is symmetrical, then it's relatively easy to get yourself two symmetric looking pieces of feather. So I'm going to pull them off the stem. Oops, this one separated. Okay. Come on. Once you took them off the stem of the feather, they can be a little bit hard to put together again. Okay, so now I got my two slips, and what I'm going to do with them is I am going to align the tips and put these things together. One on either side of the fly. So let's see. I don't like to tie this one at a time because then I don't always get them as symmetric as I'd like to. So I get them here on either side of the brown wing that I just tied in. Secure and don't let go until it's well secured to the hook. Okay, so that's one side, that's the other side. Trim the waist. And now for the final ingredient, where I need a badger, ideally a badger soft hackle. Well, this comes from one of those cheap rooster necks that used to be widely available. And if you search around, you can still find one somewhere. And it's a badger hackle, right? So tips are cream colored and the center is dark, it's pretty black here, right? And you can see this is not a dry fly hackle. This is pretty, pretty webby center. Okay, so I've prepared this feather already by cutting off some of the fluffiest of the fluff in the center. Now I'm just going to attach it after trimming a little bit of a piece here. This makes securing the hackle a lot safer than if you leave that just a bare stem. Okay, let's just move the thread to the front. Clip that one little stray fiber. Thread around, and now I'm also going to use hackle pliers. This makes holding things a little bit easier. Okay. So what I want here is I want to, like Dave was doing with the Marabou, generally for wet flies, you want, as you're wrapping, you want to try to control your feather a little bit. See, the stem is twisting on me, and that's always making things tougher. Just go back and keep folding. Sometimes getting your fingers a little moist can help with the folding of the feather, right? So you want to hold it, right? So the curvature goes like this to the back, but you want to, whoa, this is a feather that does not want to be wrapped here. Let's try a different hackle plier. Maybe that's going to be making life a little easier, not this one. See, this is a good excuse to justify to yourself a new pair of hackle pliers. You can never have too many hackle pliers. See, this is the rotating type of feather, and that's usually a bit of a problem. So anyway, just keep going and keep folding those fibers back as well as you can. There's still room to remedy things at the end just a little bit, you know, to get things in proper shape. So at this point, I'm considering myself reasonably satisfied with the hackle. The perfectionists among us might decide that this feather was not good enough and just go and get another one. That's okay too. And then trim. And pull back on the fibers a little bit and tidy up the front here and build a bit of a head. That usually does the trick in terms of pushing any fibers that were unwilling to go back, pushing them back. Okay, when you're satisfied with that, and just take a whip finisher or do it with your fingers, whatever you feel more comfortable with. I like to do a couple of whip finishes. And then if you like your fly heads lacquered, you can do that as well at this point. And this is the fly. This is called the Red Dragon. It's got some nice red accents in it and just looks like one of these old time wet flies that I just like tying this just for the sheer pleasure of what they look like. Okay, this is pattern number 1. Pattern number 2 is the so-called Thunder Creek minnow. I may have to move my camera a little bit because this thing is a bigger fly. And this is one of a family of flies. Let me see my, where's my, zoom here. Okay, and maybe a little bit more, which way? This way. This is a bigger fly, right? So I'm trying to get it in the frame.
That's good.
So this, yes. Is it okay?
Great.
Okay, so this is the so-called Thunder Creek minnow. And if you do a little bit of a search, you'll find that these Thunder Creek flies are a whole family. They're built on the same principle. And they're very simple. It's just bucktail and a bit of flash. And if you want, you can put eyes on these things. Either glue the eyes on and then finish everything off with a bit of epoxy coating to make everything nice and strong. Or you can use dumbbell eyes and then it becomes basically a version of a clouser. Or you can use, as I did here, some bead chain eyes from the hardware store. Okay. The distinguishing feature here is that you do this this bullet head. So you tie the hair forward and then you fold it back. Okay. And I thought, yeah, you know, we have a saying in Romania where we say selling cucumbers to the gardener. I guess the English equivalent of that is preaching to the choir, if I'm not mistaken. So I thought, yeah, you know, these guys, bucktail flies, you know, this is their bread and butter. They do this stuff all the time. You know, what can I show them? That's, you know, a little more interesting, perhaps. So I thought, well, it's Christmas time. And so I have red bucktail. I have green bucktail. It's going to be the red-green show. And all the other Thunder Creeks are basically tied the same way, right? So you just, let's make this a fun Christmas fly because it's going to be our last fly for this fly tying year. And
To
it's
be
gonna
red,
launch
green
us.
fly, you
Sorry?
really need, to be a red, green fly, you'd really need some duct tape in there somehow.
Yeah, I suppose for reinforcing the head, once a few fish have chewed through it, you just have a piece of handy duct tape and you repair your fly in the field with duct tape. I think that's how that's going to be done. Okay, so this fly also calls for a tinsel body, and you can use whichever variety of tinsel you prefer. I'm just going to be very bold about this tinsel business and just go and try to do it in one layer. See how that goes. Okay, so I'm going to start at the tail end, and I'm just going to wrap my tinsel on. This is one of the things that make rotary tying pleasant. When you do long-bodied streamers and you have to wrap a tinsel, you really find the value in rotary tying. For tying, little dry flies, I'm not sure I would want to go through that bother. Okay, so depending on how much reinforcement you want here, you could just put a coat of glue on this, or you could counterwind a piece of wire or something, whatever. And now the next thing is to make a decision about the sequence of colors. So this is going to ride right side up because it doesn't have any eyes on top to flip the fly over. And normally you put the darker color on the top and the lighter color on the bottom. So I was looking through a picture book with coastal marine life of the Pacific Northwest. And, the things that you run into seem to be bits of seaweed, kelp, and there is a whole host of red color fishes. So I suppose if you have a red color fish hiding underneath a piece of kelp, well, then this is the red-green fly. So what that's going to require, obviously, then is going to be a red belly for the fly. So I turn my hook upside down and then a green top. The way I'm going to do it is just take a bunch of the red hair, and I need some scissors that are more suited to cutting coarser material like this red bucktail here. It's pretty coarse stuff. Oh yeah, it's coarser than I thought. Okay, I got myself a bunch of red hair. There you go. And all I do with the hair, I don't stack bucktail, because what happens is when you cut this off the tail, it already gives you a little bit of a natural taper. So the only issue here is to decide on length. All right, so this is hook length plus a little bit, plus some allowance for flipping everything over. So I'm just going to put my hair up here. If I want to making my life even easier, what I can do is I can just measure exactly and then cut. And I'm trying to cut over my waste container. Okay. Transfer back. And you know, if the hair starts, you know, it does have a tendency to wrap itself around the hook a little bit, but you just secure it and then lift up as much as you can. Ah, okay. Broke the thread. I guess when you do bucktails and similar things like that, you can't have thread that's too strong. I'm just going to put my thread back here. Oh, come on. This being one of these automatic bobbins, it's lucky that I held on to the bobbin itself so it didn't spin out of control completely. So it just, if you leave everything in place, usually you can go back to where you were and restart your thread, and you haven't really lost anything. And then all you need to do is to clean up the leftover thread, which is going to hang somewhere where you don't want it. Okay. So here's my, I was a little over enthusiastic pulling on that thread. And there's more hair here than I want. I just go and trim. A little bit of a taper will make life a lot easier. Okay. So there it is. Okay, so that's, it looks okay on that side. All right, so now I go back to the beginning and put, so this is when I fold back, this is going to be the underside of the fly. Now what I want before I put the second half of the hair, I'm going to get some crystal flash in here. And this is just a batch of mixed colors that I basically prepared when I sorted through my flashes, and there were stray pieces of crystal flash that came off their original bundles. So I'm just going to separate a little number of these. I want a little bit of red, and I have a little bit of green in here, so they're nicely mixed. There's also a little bit of silver and pearl. That looks fine to me. Now, I don't want to overdo this, so I'll just take, this is plenty. Okay. And I'm going to tie the flash on top of the fly so it doesn't get tangled up with the hook as easily as it would otherwise, which is a kind of a standard problem with these limpy materials. So what I do is I hook it, I hook the strands of flash underneath the hook, and then I secure them on top. And this way they'll be sitting at a bit of an angle, and they'll be on top of the hook, and there'll be no interference there when you fish, hopefully. At least that's the plan. And now for the final touch, a little bit of the green. So this is officially called olive. It's almost chartreuse in the right kind of light. And try to find a clump that is of a comparable length. As bucktails, they're anything but matched. Okay, but you can usually find around the base of the tail. That's usually the nicer hair. So let me try to get this cut. Okay. I think the vacuum cleaner is going to have to come out this afternoon. So here's my bunch. And now I'm going to just clean all these stray fibers. Should also get rid of any of the shorter hairs. Okay, and now let's measure this against the red. So to match with the red, it'd have to go about here. And that looks to me like if I tie it in here, yeah, that should do. Okay, so now basically you can't really see what you're doing at this point because everything is covered in hair. But I'm gonna remove my hand here a little bit so you can see. I'm using the place where I left the previous thread wrap, right? So I wrapped the red all the way to the eye of the hook. And that tells me exactly how far I need to go with the thread now when attaching the second bunch of hair. So then all I need to do is go in here. And if I find that this is a little too much, which I do find, I just simply trim this off. Because I don't want to go too far back on the body either. Right? The head of the fly needs to be in some proportion to the rest. You can see the problem I was mentioning earlier, which is this bunch of flash having a tendency to go on the underside of the hook, and that's what I'm trying to avoid. A few wraps of thread behind the flash is going to fix the problem. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'll simply pull back the two bunches of hair. So here's the green, and here's the red. And, you know, have it as much as possible. So this is going to take a little bit of time. Just, you know, take your time and keep pushing things back. And as you can see now, there are some short hairs that have shown up. We're going to deal with those at the end. So I left the thread in the place where I'm going to attach this whole bundle of hair. If I did this right, the hair is not going to flare too much. So if you have a problem with the hair flaring too much, just go back a little bit after you've compressed the hair nicely. But don't tighten until you move the thread further forward like this. Okay. So at this point, we're pretty much done. All that needs to be done is a bit of cleanup. And here I think tweezers might be the cleaner solution to fixing this. So you have, I somehow ended up with a bunch of short, fine hairs here that didn't come out as I was cleaning my bunch. So if you're a bit more thorough in cleaning your hair, you're not gonna have this problem as much as I did. Or not at all. Okay, so these are stray hairs I don't like. Okay, this is as much as I can do at this point, and then use my whip finisher. And this takes care of the whip finish. If you're doing this in the non-Christmas colors, what you want, you can either tie directly with red thread, like this, or you can do the red thread at the end. That's up to you. So what I've done on a bunch of patterns, I just tied with a thicker black thread, and then I used the red thread, or you can use whatever accent you feel like using. Red looks nice though on these flies. And that's done. The only thing that's left to do is just a little touch of lacquer. And because I don't like to work with epoxy so much, I just use the good old Sally Hansen. Just give it a good coat. Let it dry, and then come back with a second coat. That makes a pretty strong head the first time around. You don't want to put excessive amounts the first time. So several thinner coats is better, because the first coat needs to get a chance to dry up and harden properly before you go in with the second coat. And that's it. It's only the head and this little thread band, which is like the gills of the minnow, that you're trying to do. Okay, and now I'm just going to set this aside and let it dry. And this is the fly. It just stays on a piece of foam like this, which I keep for doing the flies. I have several of these hooks prepared. I have to tie a few more. I might try a few of these Christmas looking ones. They do look like minnows after all. So, and otherwise, more traditional colors are, white bellies and darker backs, like the ones I showed you. So this is designed to ride upside down. So the brown hair goes on the back. And the thing is with the bucktails, as you know, right? They're whatever color they're dyed, they maintain the same pattern of part of the bucktail is lighter and part of it is darker, right? So the natural ones are white and brown, and anything that's dyed is going to take on the same sort of tone contrast, right? So this was dyed green. You have pretty bright green, or on where the bucktail was white, and then you have the matching color where the brown was dyed. So you can basically just use the one bucktail for the two contrasting tones. And with this, I guess we are done. Duct tape's missing here, but
it might be interesting to try and tie one of those on a tube.
and absolutely, yeah. The I don't see why it wouldn't work, because the challenge is I just had some long shank hooks that are not ring eye.
Yeah.
And if you want a ring eye hook on a streamer, the tube would solve that problem for you very nicely.
Yeah.
So that's, and you can adjust the length of the shank to whatever you want, which otherwise means you have to buy hooks in all these crazy sizes and whatnot. Yeah. And yeah, so, and saltwater hooks are expensive too. So if you're doing this for the salt, you know, you just get a standard batch of whatever style of hook, you know, like the ones they showed are very nice. And you can just stick with one model of hook.